just by way of introducing some of the discussion that we hope to have here this afternoon, I just would like to draw your attention to the news of yesterday, North Dakota legislature's spectacular burst of energy. The first thing they did was to make sure that they have a law that prevents any unemployment benefits being paid to locked out workers in response to one of the most important blackouts and struggles in the country of crystal sugar. The second thing they did was vote to end federally subsidized meals, milk and juice during a school break for children in the state of North Dakota. They also took immediate action to challenge, to get rid of any legal recourse for sexual orientation discrimination. And finally, of course, they passed a bill that would basically completely reverse Roe v. Wade, the court decision that made abortion legal in the United States. So what the question I pose to you, and that hopefully we can discuss in a variety of ways this afternoon, is that why is it that every state that enacts draconian anti-union measures, like Michigan and North Dakota, who's cutting social services, is also trying to annihilate reproductive rights and make other serious cuts that dramatically affect women and children? What is it about capitalism and its crises and this crisis that ensures that women will be in the crosshairs with each downturn? Why is it that women's oppression is so integral to this system's effort to recover profitability? And so we have a variety of speakers with us today to begin to tackle that question from several different approaches. And I hope that we can, I hope that by the end we'll have answered that in a new and sufficient way. So our first speaker today is Ann Montague. Ann is a member of the Oregon SEIU State Retirees Committee. She's been helped initiate Pride at Work and is a longtime LGBTQ activist. Ann Montague.
Thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to start by saying I think all of us and people outside this room are so tired of hearing the terms fiscal cliff and sequester. And but one thing that I think it's important for us to remember is that the ruling class thinks about the words and the terms that they use very clearly. And what I always think of is that cliff is a natural rock formation in nature, and sequester is a term that most people think of as a legal process in which you pursue justice. But we know what it's really about is austerity. And one of the definitions of austerity is that a group or individual of people are trying to impose on another group or individual people, and that certainly is what we're faced with, and most countries, global countries in the world, use that term austerity, and I think we should be also. It's a manufactured crisis, and they want to make us pay for a crisis imposed on us by the predatory capitalist system, and that particular austerity includes adding, I believe, at least one more burden on to women, so that now the burdens on women are triple, as opposed to generally we talk about the double burden. Our work continues to be undervalued and, of course, underpaid, and in addition now, often we are forced to work part-time, seasonal work, or temporary work. And in addition, we're being assaulted by ideological attacks that Chris mentioned that are trying to destroy all the gains of the second wave of feminism and the women's liberation movement, so that not only are there attacks on abortion rights, but on the right to conception, and not only violence against women, but we're faced with a rape culture. And while many women see the Republicans as the generals in the war on women, they may not yet see that it's a bipartisan attack that's just begun, and hopefully they will, and we can illustrate that. A big part of this plan is to cut the growing costs of social services, as meager as they are, and transfer the economic burden and responsibility for these services back on the individual or the family. This is an ideological offensive on our equality and independence, and it reinforces the roles of wife, mother, caretaker, housekeeper, and elder care. It adds new ones. As polls show, 57% of the country today supports marriage equality. The ruling class thinks this is not what we had in mind when we talk of family values. But now it's more difficult to push women back into the home, where they have been integrated into the workforce for decades and more economically independent back in the home. So through manipulative propaganda, they have been bombarding women with individual responsibility for child care, elder care, education, and health care. There are increasingly twin attacks both on social programs and public sector jobs where women are in the majority. The jobs and benefits in these sectors are targets for austerity, layoffs, furloughs, and increased workload. So what are some of the examples of how they are moving this responsibility for social services back in individuals? For many years, I worked as a case manager for senior and disability services. We would go in and see clients on Medicaid to see if they needed help with personal care. It was a process where we could do an evaluation, find out if they qualified. It was a win-win. The clients were happy because they could stay in their home and not go into nursing homes. And at that time, the state was very happy because it cost them much less to keep people in their homes and not in nursing homes. So about 3 years ago or so, maybe more than that, 4, there started to be a change where all of a sudden we were instructed that we must investigate, insist, cajole clients to think about who they know that could do those services for them, do that personal care. So could they think of a family member or parents, in-laws? Could they think of a neighbor? Could they think, do they attend church? Are there people in churches? Now, it's important to remember that this is not visiting grandpa and taking him shopping. These are personal care. And if people want to know more details, I'll tell you afterwards. But you have an idea. This is hands-on personal care that they were trying to move back into the family, and I can tell you that the majority of these are, in fact, women. So once that happened, all of a sudden, the case managers were finding that we have a whole new group of people that are totally stressed out. So these family members that are helping now with this personal care, most of them are women, and most of them also have at least part-time jobs. Some of them were taking care of others, and they were like so stressed out that we needed to set up some kind of respite for them. And then in addition to that, we also, there's always an increase in abuse. So the problems compounded and compounded, but they always came back to the family. And this is what's happening in many, many areas. Just another short example would be the food stamp program, which does not provide food for the entire month. So they actually renamed it, just to be clear. It went from food stamps, which everyone still calls it, to SNAP, which is supplemental nutritional assistance program. And now we have to make sure to give them the addresses of food banks, and which already people who don't qualify for food stamps are accessing churches. And of course, you know, if that doesn't work about the 3rd week of the month, you might just contact your family and see if they couldn't help you with food for the rest of the month. So this is the general direction that it's going. And it's not only burdening the already stressed out family with another responsibility, but these jobs are in the public sector, and these union members are predominantly women, and in cities, women of color. So, and in a sense, the fight back up to this point has been somewhat meager. The shining light has been, of course, the Chicago Teachers Union recently, and also National Nurses United have been involved in a lot of important struggles. And one of the reasons the fight back has been so rare and infrequent is the domination of the Democratic Party with their submissive partner, the union bureaucracies. And without a broad left-wing fight-back movement with an organized rank and file, these struggles will not go too far. So in the late 1980s, I was involved with a struggle for around pay equity. So they were looking at the classifications for jobs that were predominantly female. And they spent like 2 years up in the state capitol. And they would testify before hearings, and they would negotiate with the Democratic governor, and they would get people to go and sit down and talk to your legislator. And after 2 years, the governor said, well, I'm going to veto this legislation because you have absolutely too many classifications. But please come back to the next session. And at that point, the union said, no, we don't think so. We're going to go to the bargaining table. And it's interesting, you can see the change. As soon as the union made that decision, it set off the organizing, women's organizing around the strike. And eventually, then what they did was they organized the women who did hearings around the state. We had picket lines, and then eventually, of course, we organized and went on strike. And we got those upgrades, and I won't go into it, I have the article in the paper, but today there's a living wage campaign which is basically the same as what we did in 1987. And they're having to start over. And why are they doing that? Because without the continuity of a rank and file women's movement and a left-wing rank and file organization, they have to go back to scratch every time. So the ruling class wants to maximize the exploitation of women for their profit, and at the same time make these ideological arguments that social services are the responsibility of women within their extended family and not a responsibility of the society as a whole. And what women are key to the fight back against austerity. Women are half the labor force and continue to be 76 cents on the dollar earned by men. And you all know that, you've heard these all the time. But why? Why is that? There remains strong, deep-seated discrimination that maintains a system of gender segregation. This means women are still marginalized and undervalued jobs because of discrimination in hiring into skilled blue-collar jobs. These are jobs that are placed at the nucleus, the hub, where the working class has the most pivotal, crucial economic power, as well as being high paid or more highly paid than women's jobs. Now the women that I know who are in what are called non-traditional jobs got those jobs in the 1970s when there was a very strong women's liberation movement in the streets, and also there was affirmative action. Those women had to struggle with abuse, discrimination, harassment on the shop floor, as well as from management from within the union and without. And I know one woman that experienced one of those things every day of her work life for 30 years. A militant union movement is not possible without half the working class. For women to win that war on women, we need to end the profit system that depends on our second-class status and determined to deny our basic needs. To accomplish this will require a mass movement of working people led by women and others who understand the historic demands of reproductive freedom, child care, equality, and affirmative action. In every crisis in the capitalist system, and every time austerity has been imposed, the cries rang out for sanctity of the heterosexual family, motherhood, and children. But now, today, women are seeing this posturing as just a little bit hollow. In a time when the struggle for democratic rights for LGBTQI workers and gender equality is being affirmed by a majority, and for those born since 1981, 70% believe in those struggles for democratic rights. The term family values now has an archaic ring. This time, such patriarchal ranting often falls on deaf ears. The traditional cries of working class have resonance, more resonance today than yesterday, and more tomorrow than today. It's time that we demand that the society as a whole, not individuals, take responsibility for basic human needs. This includes, but is not only inclusive of, the care of children, the elderly. It includes healthy food and medical care. Instead of suffocating women with increasing demands that this is our responsibility, we need a mass movement to demand responsibility put where the blame, where it, not the blame, but where it belongs on society as a whole.
Our next speaker is Alice Richard. She's a graduate student in urban planning at UMass Amherst, a union steward, and longing to be an activist in the women's movement.
Hi everybody. Can we maybe close the door or something?
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
Thanks for coming. First I was a little like, oh, there's not very many women here. It's kind of disappointing. But then I realized we'd be mostly speaking, to the choir, and I'm glad it's mostly men here to listen, even though a lot of men here have read about these issues or been involved in the struggles over time. It's always good to refresh it. And so I just wanted to come here as a young woman and a working woman and a union woman and kind of explain what's going on for young women. Like Ann was saying, sexual harassment and discrimination have been around ever since women have been brought into the workforce. But now young women have to contend with those things as so normal that for a lot of young women they don't even register as sexual harassment or anything. It's just going to work. But they also have to deal with rape culture. They also have to deal with sexual assault everywhere they go that could possibly happen to them. And they're still getting paid less than men, much less. And women of color are making even much less than white women. So I think right now white women earn 76, sometimes close to 80 cents on the dollar to white men, but black women make about 60 cents to the dollar to white men. And so I'm really glad that we're all here talking about this in a Marxist fashion. So I want to talk about the Marxist feminist approach because it's a little bit different than feminism as we hear in the media generally. And so just to give some news, just in the past couple of weeks we have grappled with the sentencing of the Steubenville rapists and what that means. Do we want a right-wing fight back asking for more prison time and just increasing the prison industrial complex? Marxists don't want that. Do we want a left-wing fight back that says, how can we deal with this in a social and a cultural and material way? How can we give women the tools to own their own lives? And the outpouring of sympathy for the rapists was really pretty appalling. And even Fox News and some of the other major news channels released the name of the victim who was underage, and the court wasn't releasing her name, said she was Jane Doe. So that was really appalling. And the ever progressive NYPD, we all know they're very lovely, and hot on their recent murder of 16-year-old Kamani Gray and their subsequent establishment of martial law in Flatbush, they're now requiring cops to run background checks on domestic violence victims. So you can only imagine what that does for poor and working women in New York City, often of color, who may have arrest warrants for petty crimes or prostitution, and staying with their partners, putting them more at risk to be in prison. Prison doesn't do women any favors. And then in the past 2 weeks, the U.S. military has murdered at least 15 more people in Yemen and Pakistan with its drone strikes, including 2 children in Yemen. And then there's just the regular day-to-day assaults by the police, by the court systems, women going to school or in colleges and high schools. We see, just like as there was a sort of a tumbling out of stories out of India and the east of rapes, there are more stories coming out every day in the United States. And just in where we are in Connecticut, a town in Torrington, a 13-year-old girl was raped at a party of some sort, and the whole town has cried out against her and called her a whore, and basically insisting that she be punished for drinking underage, but that boys will just be boys. But women have been fighting back here and around the world. Here, primarily, there have been that can do women the most good. Nurses and care workers are striking across the country as to keep their wages and to keep their own health care benefits, which in turn benefit their families. And the winter has also seen massive protests across India against rape. And there we see that the right wing sort of won that debate with the government saying, first the government in India said, oh, there's nothing to see here, rape's not really a big deal. Now they're saying, okay, we'll allow the death sentence. Again, that doesn't mean to solve the problem. And similarly, like Andy was talking about before and Chris was talking about before, tens of thousands of women and men in Egypt were protesting for their rights and against sexual harassment, only to be beat up by a mob of angry, organized right-wing folks who were seeking to break down their movement. And one woman was stripped and stomped by the military police and really injured. But the women have continued to protest, which is, very brave of them. And then in February, we also had the 1 Billion Rising movement, which was founded by vagina monologue writer Eve Ensler. So she's not the most Marxist of feminists, but she's done a really good job of getting the word out there about sexual assault and needing to end. So millions of women danced and spoke out all over the world, had rape speak outs and other events, and to stand in solidarity with one another. And in the U.S., this was even, this was especially popular because maybe we don't see every day in the news, it's really glossed over, this violence against women, but every year in the United States, about 1,000 women are murdered by their domestic or intimate partner. And about 25% of college women experience rape or sexual assault. And so this movement was sort of building upon the slut walk movement that happened a couple of years ago, where young women were protesting against being victim blamed for the behavior against them. But this one was the 1 Billion Rising is a bit of a different character. And so we need to understand that all of these attacks on women are related to their economic status. And it's just as bleak, really. In the United States, women have made gains far outpacing men in college achievement and degree attainment. At some colleges now, they're upwards of 60% of the college population, which some of the administrators are scratching their heads saying, how are we going to get all our men married off? What are we going to do? Yeah, it's really ridiculous. And they do occupy more positions of leadership than they ever have in the U.S., which is not even as good as some other countries. Like, I think Afghanistan has more women in their parliament. And but there's no industry in the United States, as categorized by the U.S. Census, that breaks down employment industries, like food service versus, like manufacturing versus forestry or whatever. There's no industry where women make the same as men. In almost every single one, they make $10,000 to $15,000 less. This is as of 2011 numbers. And where I live in Massachusetts, the trend is identical. So, even in liberal Massachusetts, where you think, oh yeah, women totally get paid more, they don't at all. And this doesn't even take into account women who work part-time and contingent work. They're not counted in these full-time figures. So these women who are counting full-time figures, they're kind of the top of the heap. Anyways, they have full-time jobs. We won't even get into the long-term unemployment that people are facing and what that does to them. And even in female-dominated fields like nursing, where women have generally had better wages and better benefits, there's been some new charts coming out that there's been an increase of male nurses because the social stigma has gone away, and because it's a good paying job. The male nurses now are making more than the female nurses. Okay? And I don't want to hear anyone say ever again in the history of the world that this wage inequality is because women don't bargain hard enough. You know, I've tried to bargain with my boss for higher wages, and you don't want to see what that looks like. And on a related note to that, especially for young women who are trying to get work, unpaid internships are on the rise, and internships. And I don't think it used to be as much of a thing until maybe the 2000s. Internships are really booming. They're a great way to get unpaid labor, educated unpaid labor. And so there's a company called Intern Bridge, which researches these internship trends, but then also sells the data to companies so they can find more unpaid interns. But they calculated that about 75% of unpaid internships are held by young women. And yes, this figure has a class element. A lot of women who are able to work for free, maybe have their families caring for them or have some sort of means. But that's really not the question. The question is, why are women continually being asked to work for free, to work part-time, to work on a contingent basis? And why are we assuming that their families are going to take care of them? And like Anne was saying before, why are we always putting all of this burden on the families to do what we should all be doing together, which is providing education, and which is full employment for everyone, not this unpaid crap. And then there's an offshoot of this kind of culture. There's been a rise of dating websites like sugardaddy.com, and there's a couple of these where young women can go on and try to find maybe older, wealthier men to sort of date and get money. So it's like a nice veiled prostitution. And with student loans, a lot of women are really desperate for that kind of way out, because there's really no way out for them. And a woman named Madeline Shorts of Dissent magazine recently published a really good piece on the low-paid and the unpaid issue, and pointing out how it's not really any different from asking women to work unpaid in the home. So, you want to grow up to be a housewife and cook and clean and do laundry and raise all these kids for free? That's great. You're also going to work for us for free, too. And so, getting to that issue of unpaid labor in the home, it's a really complicated issue for women. It forms, one of the pillars of the double burden of oppression. And it's where the tenets of choose your choice feminism, you can have a career and you can have babies too. It's just your choice. That starts to not make sense when you see that women are essentially forced into this by the state and by the culture, and that if you want to have children on your own and do that, how are you going to pay for it if you can't have a job that pays as much as any man, and also no one else is home taking care of your kids? This doesn't make sense, really. And so that unpaid work and the lower paid work in the public sphere, we call it the public sphere in capitalism, form that double burden. And so I want to explain a little bit more where this conceptual division of public and private comes from, because it really allows us to create all these myths about women, like they're naturally meant to be in the home, they're supposed to be good mothers, and this is basically every TV show movie you will ever see demonizes a woman actually tries to go out and live her own life, and really uplifts the woman who stays home. So in class society, we're asked to accept the material basis of separation of home and public sphere. The home sphere is everything to do with private families, right? So marriage, raising children, caring for disabled and elderly family members, and domestic work such as laundry, cooking, cleaning, and emotional support. And much of this work is necessary to reproduce